I'm Sherry Burr, and I have a co-host for this show, Matthew Gandert, who's a currently enrolled law student at the University of New Mexico. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. And our special guest is Gerald Weinberg, who's the author of nearly 40 books, including Weinberg on Writing. Welcome, Jerry. Nice to have you here. Writing the book,
Right.
But there's this whole process that comes between the time you finish the book or think you finish the book and the time it actually appears in print.
Yeah, this is the difference. I call it. The one is writing down versus writing. People will ask me, how long does it take you to write a book? The question doesn't have any meaning for me, because how long did it take you to write your most recent law book? Your whole life, right?
Well, it depends on the book. I mean, one book took 10 years.
No, it took more than that.
Yeah,
See, because you use things in that book that you learned when you were a little girl.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
So if you're a writer, you're always writing. You're always doing part of the process.
Living,
right.
That living is part of the process of writing.
And well, only if you notice. See, only if you're living consciously. Right? Or at least taking it in unconsciously so you can get it later. Think about artists generally, and not just writers. I mean, painters, they're always looking at the world and seeing things often in ways that we non-painters, don't see. Right? This is just the same way a lawyer looks at a situation and thinks, there's legal implications of this and that.
Exactly.
Right? And if you're really a professional, that's what you're doing. Now, this is all you're doing. I mean, you may be eating, and you may be noticing the food because you have to write about it. See, one of the things is I'm writing fiction. For me, I tend to be up in my head at a very high level, and I don't generally notice what people are wearing unless it's something very beautiful like Kate's scarf.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's very striking, or your necklace. Then I noticed that. I didn't notice your tie. I'm sorry. It's okay. But when I'm writing, some people, to put them in the trance of fiction or even nonfiction, where they're here and it's real to them, you have to say something about what the people are wearing. It's not a bunch, unless it's about a nudist colony story, then they don't have to say anything about that, right? And I go to do that, and I would be blocked if I did that stupid thing because I don't know, and I don't know about clothes. So what do you think I do?
What do you do?
Okay, it's the kinds of things that writers do. I travel around, and I specifically notice, always carry pens and things like that. I notice interesting stuff, and I make notes about it. And I go to clothing stores. I go on the web and look at catalogs. I talk to my wife, who does notice clothing. I ask people about the clothing they're wearing, and I ask you about where you got that scarf, right? And then a whole story came out.
Okay.
See?
So are you saying then that with different types of writing, like when you decided to write a novel, a writer has to be aware of different elements that go into the process?
Yes.
For example, I wrote this memoir, a little one-year memoir called Living with Nephew. And a friend of mine was commenting about how I always notice what food she buys or what food she serves. And I says, yeah, there's food throughout this book, but there's nothing about clothing. So I realized, I started to think, maybe I should go back and add clothing and more description of furniture, that maybe it needs to have more contours, I guess,
exactly.
would you say? Okay.
When you hear that expression about one-dimensional writing, see, that's exactly what happens. So you were kind of food-dimensional.
Yes.
But,
and dialogue dimensional.
Yeah,
I love writing about what people are saying. Like, I'm very conscious. I listen a lot to what people say. So I'm really good at capturing dialogue.
do you capture their emotions? But you just,
Yes, actually, yes, pretty good. Yes, I am pretty good at that. But I'm not so good at noticing clothing. So I think I have to go back or become more conscious. Wouldn't you say that the writer needs to be, whatever you're writing about may call for different dimensions.
To make it come alive and real and meaningful. Now, for one of the hardest things to notice is what's missing. So what's missing here is that Matthew hasn't said anything much. See, and I noticed that.
Yes.
Did you notice that?
Well, Matthew's kind of shy, but
Well,
you can talk.
okay, but then, well, now I'm going to see what it takes to get Matthew to, because I think he's got stuff going on. See, I look at his eyes, that's another thing, and there's something going on back there, right?
Oh, yeah, a lot.
Okay, so what would you like to talk about?
I was wondering about the marketing of your book. Do you approach it, do you see an opening in the market and then write a book, or do you just write a book and then hope that the market eventually catches up to it?
Okay, 2 times in my career, I have written a book to market, where a publisher came to me and said, we want you to write such and such book because there's this great market for it. These 2 books are the only 2 books I've ever written that were financial flops.
Oh, really?
Yeah, okay?
Really?
Now, for some people, they can write to a market, all right? But there's also things you have to do besides that. Another interesting story, my brother-in-law is a psychiatrist married to my sister, the intellectual property attorney. He was Richard Speck's psychiatrist. You know who Richard Speck was?
No idea
Does anybody know who Richard Speck was?
Enlighten us for the
He
TV
murdered, raped and murdered 9 nurses in Chicago in one night. In this horrible case, this horrible case.
Who was
he was
your
arrested.
brother-in-law was the psychiatrist?
My brother-in-law, he works with the prison system, and he had Richard Speck to take care of while he was in prison. So he wasn't supposed to do this, but he wrote a book about Speck, which was, of course, a market, right? Because at the time, that was all the news, that was everything. So he wrote a book. Basically, he got a guy from Time magazine who wrote the book, Ghost wrote it for him. And my sister, being an intellectual property attorney, negotiated the contract for him, got this wonderful contract, but it took her 2 years to negotiate the contract. So when the book came out, it didn't sell. Speck was out of the news, right? So yes, I mean, you have to be aware of markets if you're trying to make money, which is what they were trying to do. But I've only these 2 times, and I don't think I'll tell you what they were, but basically, I've written books, like probably my best-selling book, which has sold over 500,000 copies, and then it's translated into a dozen languages.
What's that one?
That was called The Psychology of Computer Programming.
Oh, okay.
Okay? And that book was the first book I ever had that was rejected by a publisher. Okay? In fact, I've only had 4 that were ever, well, that would be my 5th. So
This was rejected?
That was rejected by one publisher, and then
Only one?
Yeah.
Did you have a reason why they rejected it?
Well, let me tell you about the psychology of computer programming. And I saved the letters. It was actually rejected by a couple of publishers. And they said, well, it's very nice. They had terrific reviews, very nice, but it's not a subject. And, who would buy it? Nobody would buy it, right? See, they don't know anything about it. Marketing, the first principle of marketing is that anybody who claims that they understand marketing doesn't understand marketing, okay? Which is easy to figure out because nobody understands marketing, right? And book marketing particularly. Now, there are certain things they do understand, right? Like a friend of mine, his father wrote a book called Algebra for Canadians. Right?
Is that one so well?
Well, it sold well, and he knew what it would sell because it would go in schools.
Right.
Canada has a law about certain books that are used have to be by Canadian authors, and it had to have, instead of a train going from New York at 60 miles an hour to Los Angeles, another train from Los Angeles at 40 miles an hour, there's a train from Montreal at 90 kilometers, and they wrote this, and they sold pretty much exactly the number they thought, right? But somebody thinks they're writing a bestseller or something like that. They don't know, unless they've already written a bestseller, and then they write another one just like it.
Right. Let's ask our audience. Do any of you have any questions for our guest?